Our topic today is remembering the Alamo. And I don't know about you, but as I get older, it's just tougher and tougher to remember anything. But the Alamo certainly is one of those things that keeps coming to mind, and perhaps today we can find out just why. What is this obsession all about? And why have these men devoted so much of their lives, years they will never get back, to the story of the Alamo? Some of them, because of their wayward habits, had less time to waste than others. James Donovan, speaking of that, is the president. I do know all these people pretty well. James Donovan is the president of Jim Donovan Literary, a literary agency headquartered in Dallas. He wanted me to tell all of you potential authors out there just to rush up right after the show and make your pitches to him. He loves that. He just loves it.
The more the merrier.
Thrives on it. He represents many truly outstanding authors here.
Like, for instance.
Here. And then other writers as well. He represents these authors steadfastly. He, though, is also an author himself. He's the author of several books. The two of the most famous being A Terrible Glory, the story of Custer and the Little Bighorn, and his most recent book, The Blood of Heroes, published by Little Brown, the book we will be discussing today. Next to Jim is Michael Wallis. Michael is the author of 17 books. He's an award-winning author. Many of his books are on the history of the American West. Of course, he's most famous for writing about the Mother Road, Route 66, which is becoming increasingly popular. It's now sort of the 20th century Oregon Trail. I mean, it really is an amazing story. He also wrote The Real Wild West about the 101 Ranch. He wrote a biography of Pretty Boy Floyd. And, of course, his latest book is David Crockett, The Lion of the West, published by Norton. And I'm going to pass the books down so the authors can hold it up in front of them when they speak. So, my children, though, are most impressed by Michael's voice work in the Pixar Studios production of Cars and Cars 2. And he'll be doing some voice impersonations for us all later. Also with us today is another show business type. He's Stephen Harrigan. He's a novelist and screenwriter. Many years he was a senior editor at Texas Monthly Magazine. Among his screenplays are Cleopatra, one of my favorites, and I know one of his. And I think it's particularly pertinent for an audience like this for me just to quote one of my favorite lines from all of Hollywood history, and it's Stephen Harrigan penned this line. It's after Caesar has burned Alexandria, including the great library there with all the treasures, of antiquity, and he meets Cleopatra and he says to her, "Sorry about that library."
You're kidding, right?
I'm not kidding.
No,
I wish I was kidding.
I actually wrote that line.
Yeah, he actually wrote that line. But he also wrote other things. Thank goodness. Last of His Tribe for HBO, the story of Ishi. And King of Texas for TNT, a Shakespearean take on Texas history. His novels include Challenger Park, about NASA, Remember Ben Clayton. See, I did it. You got it right. I got it. Yeah. Remember Ben Clayton. And, of course, his award-winning book, the one he'll be discussing today with us, Gates of the Alamo, published by Knopf. All of his books are published by Knopf. Well, so the question of the day is, with so much to remember, now we have 9/11 on top of Pearl Harbor, on top of the Maine. Why the Alamo? I mean, why do we remember the Alamo? And we'll start with Mr. Donovan, Blood of Heroes.
Because people love last stands. Think of Custer's Last Stand, the Alamo. What are some others? Masada. There's something that we love about last stands, and the Alamo is one of the greatest. Besides that, it's paired with some of the great names in our history: Davy Crockett, Jim Bowie, Travis, of course, isn't as well known nationally, but he was a very interesting character, and plenty of others. But anyway, that's some of the reasons.
Michael.
We could also say remember Thermopylae, because we've always, the editorial we throughout history, not just the history of this young nation, have had these these significant remember dates. And in many cases, those remembered dates are used quite effectively to incite passions, to help incite wars, to help incite conflict. They're tied into national emotions and passions, and it's an effective way to do that. And certainly, in the case of this battered little mission down in San Antonio de Bahar, Sam Houston used it very shrewdly with that immortal battle cry, "Remember the Alamo," and I think that the Alamo is probably, and I say this in my book, I think it's probably one of the best known battles, if you will, in American history, most talked about with the possible exception of Gettysburg. And I think I go on to say it's also one of the most vainglorious, with the possible exception of several decades later when Mr. Custer got his comeuppance on a grassy hill out in Montana. So the Alamo is so many things. It's a place of myth. It's a place of reality, just like all the people who participated in that battle. In my way of looking at them, I just use a common phrase that I use for most of the trans-Mississippi West. No white hats, no black hats, but a good many gray hats.
Or in this case, fur caps.
I think there's a couple reasons that the Alamo sort of resonated for so long and so deeply. The most immediate, I think, was celebrity. As Michael knows better than I, Davy Crockett was one of the most famous people in the United States at the time. And he was a very unusual politician and congressman. He came up from a different path. So it's as if, Sarah Palin had been killed in a battle in Afghanistan or something. There's just this amazing confusion about here is this guy, this very colorful, political character who is almost, literally off the map and is killed in this battle in a foreign land, which we have to remember. This was Mexico. It was not the United States, Texas at the time. The other reason, I think, is more emotional and strikes deeper, and that is because the Alamo has been portrayed for so long as a model of deliberate self-sacrifice on the part of the Alamo garrison. And Jim can speak to this more than I can. I've never quite believed the story that Travis drew a line in the sand and asked the men who were willing to stay and die to cross the line. But that story has such power because it makes us believe that, yes, there is this thing worth dying for, and yes, these men chose to die for it. And so it became this emblem of nobility and courage and sacrifice that, like Thermopylae and other events like this, just sort of resonate through human history as sort of examples of how we ought to behave.
The Alamo is very much a creation myth for Texans, and of course, Texas, unlike any other state, I think, in the Union, has a particular self-identity that transcends even being citizens of the United States of America. Didn't you secede recently again? Didn't you folks?
From time to time.
Anyway,
it's in the Constitution.
Both Donovan and Harrigan our Irish contingent reside there. Wallace and I are wise enough to live on the borderland of Texas, me and New Mexico.
He's going to be Secretary of State. I'll be Secretary of something when that happens.
I see.
We've got it all worked out.
But despite the fact that the Alamo is so central to the Texas identity, it also